Hello and welcome to episode 30 and season 3 of Subplot of Course, a podcast discussing a new science fiction work on the second Tuesday of every month. I'm Stavros, and with me is someone whose students might as well be Golas since they're half dead in his classes, Charlie. Say hi, Charlie.
Oh, started off strong in the new year.
Hot take. Hot take.
Say hi, Charlie.
Hi.
Charlie teaches math. This is a strong start. Also with me is Vincent, who is still looking to the effects of the spice. Say hi, Vincent.
Well, I mean, Netflix obviously was on the spice when they renewed us for a third season, so I'll take the money and run.
Wow, and Netflix is giving us money? That's great. Quit my day job. Vincent's an epidemiologist. And finally, we're also joined by John, who would rather be working on a Boeing 737 MAX instead of the Stoneburners. Say hi, John.
Oh my gosh, I would not. The 730. Don't get me started on the Max. What a disaster. Give me some Stoneburners.
John is a mechanical engineer. And today, we're going to be talking about Dune Messiah, aka Dune 2. I may call it Dune 2 just because it sounds awesome.
Dune 2?
Wait, Messiah sounds worse than 2?
I think so. Yeah, I'm going with 2 over Messiah. Anyway, this was written by Frank Herbert and published in 1969. And, of course, you should be prepared for spoilers. So, in this novel, set a number of years after the events of Dune, the novel follows Paul Atreides, who is now the emperor of the known universe. And thanks to him being the Kwisatz Haderach and fulfilling a messianic role of the Fremen and the planet Dune, his followers have embarked on a bloody jihad throughout the known universe. But some elements do not like Paul's authority and plot against him, including the Spacing Guild, the Bene Gesserit Order, and the Tleilaxu, an isolationist member of the Imperium who specialize in face-changing powers and resurrecting dead people in the form of their Golas. They, along with the Princess Irulan, who Paul technically married in order to usurp the throne from her father, attempt to manipulate Paul into giving him an undead Gola of his buddy Duncan Idaho, who was killed in the previous novel, in the hopes that it will cause him retrospection enough to weaken his power. But in the process of tracking down these conspirators, Paul is blinded by an atomic-powered weapon called a Stoneburner. But by this point, his prescient vision is so powerful, he can still see by synchronizing his future vision with the present. Unfortunately, this existence only makes things worse for Paul, who is not enjoying his role as a religious figure and leader, with all the bloodshed that has caused. And eventually, Paul's consort Cheney is killed in childbirth. And when the conspirators spring into action, that's exactly the time they choose to do that. The Duncan Gola has been instructed to kill Paul, but Paul gets him to fully remember his own past and, of course, his loyalty to Paul, I assume through the power of friendship. And at that point, undercover conspirators are confronted in the room where Paul's newborn twins lay. They offer Paul a Gola version of Cheney in exchange for him abdicating the throne and going to exile. And of course, at that very moment, Paul's prescience fails him. But instead, he kind of gets this telepathic link to his son, baby son, and through that vision manages to overpower the assailant before going completely blind. And at that point, Paul proceeds to exile himself into desert, as by Fremen tradition, leaving his children and sister behind to rule in his stead. Ooh, a lot of things happen.
Before we even get beyond this, I have to say, like, this is probably one of the most long-winded summations that we've ever had of a book on the episode, and it makes a good point though, because like it's not like you did a great job, by the way, Sal.
Oh, thanks.
No, but because I think you can't really summate it any denser than that, because and do it justice, because of just this isn't like a book. This isn't a book where you just like they had a war and people fought and somebody won. Where a lot of these sci-fi books are that simple. There's a lot of social dynamics, a lot of intrigue, a lot of conspiracy to follow.
So now all I can think is the solution to the book is the power of friendship.
Yes,
that's how the book conflict was resolved, essentially. But like back to your point, John, I mean that's actually the first thing I want to talk about is, you know, a lot of the the kind of fun stuff or the cool stuff, like all the action that happens with Duncan Idaho getting back on Paul's side, and like the drama where the Paul's kids are at risk, all kind of like is like stacked like right at the end. So like the vast majority of the novel is like Palace Intrigue, the novel, where it's just like people like you can just see like they're meeting in back rooms. They're like, we hate that Paul guy. Him and his jerks Fremen friends like to take over the universe, and like so much of the book is just like these just back room conversations. I want to see if you guys felt the same way.
My favorite part is how everyone has like super Bene Gesserit like training to understand the meaning behind meanings. So it's like they say 3 lines and then there's like paragraphs like, but I really knew that they were setting up this conversation with these meanings and the whole time. And in most books, I would hate that, except the setting is actually built around that having been developed. So it's like actually kind of cool.
That's fair.
Yeah, I didn't, this is probably, I think this is the 3rd time I've read this book, and I felt just like swamped by the first probably 4 or 5 chapters, and in that same feeling that like, oh my gosh, all we're doing is reliving the palace intrigue. All we're doing is reliving like what is Aaliyah up to now? Oh look, there's a conspiracy going on, and it's slow moving, and nobody knows they don't tell us what's going on, and nobody knows anything. But I actually think that's kind of the charm of the book. There's actually like there's a whole bunch of people who have prescience, but none of them actually know what's going to happen. And the people who do, which is basically Paul, he doesn't. So in the book, he knows what the future is going to be, but he doesn't focus on it. He's trying to escape what he knows, escape prescience most of the time. And that sort of obscures the reader, I think. The idea is it obscures the reader from knowing, because we're supposed to know generally what I think most of the characters know. But he knows it, but he's trying to not look at that future until it's actually going to happen, because he's basically kind of decided that's what's going to happen.
They kind of hint at a couple of the details, like they make it pretty clear that Chaney's going to die at some point in the near future, but for the most part, you just kind of know that he knows the future's going to be terrible, with a lot of like, but if they knew what I knew the other futures would be, then they would accept that this is the least terrible of terrible futures.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting, because it's kind of funny, because in the last novel, they also, through the little... like the snippets of like the history books at the start of the chapter and stuff like that, you already know what's basically going to happen. And it's kind of similar in this one, where Chaney's probably going to die, and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
kind of.
I felt this was actually a lot more elegant in the way it did it, like through the plot, versus it just being like, and we knew this guy was a jerk and killed Paul's father, and then you just spent the next 30 chapters figuring out how he killed Paul's father.
Yeah,
I thought this book was kind of interesting, because I felt like everyone was fighting for the battle of the future, because every single group, like you mentioned, John, like they kind of had future powers, because you have a Bene Gesserit like on like the enemy side, he's plotting against Paul, and you have Paul who can see the future but is trying to choose which future to kind of head towards, and then they create this rule which is like prophets can't like see into the world of other prophets, so like wherever a prophet's standing, like they can scheme, and like the other prophet can't see like within a physical space around that prophet, so they can say and do whatever they want. So it kind of felt like the entire time they were like fighting over what the future would be. Everyone plotting and scheming their own future while hiding behind an oracle of some sort, and then trying to plan for it. So it felt like a very different book from the first Dune, which was more sci-fi, more fighting, more kind of straightforward. And this was like a completely different genre, which is cool. I liked it.
Yeah, I definitely think that the flavor of this novel is definitely a lot different than the last one, because as you said, there's a lot of backroom plotting and things like that in this one, and it's kind of strange because like most of the action that's happening, like the jihad that the Fremen are leading, is like off screen. Like you don't really see a lot of it happening. It's just Paul and everyone else trying to conspire against him, hanging out on Arrakis, like doing their backroom plotting stuff, which is definitely different flavor.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, in the first book, there's lots of him hinting at, oh, if I do this, it will result in this horrific jihad type deal. But the book cuts off right after his victory, so you don't get to see any of that, even though it kind of ends with, like, and he knew things would be terrible, but he did it anyway. Whereas this book takes place, like, after all that, or, like, after all these people hate him, but he's consolidated his power, So he knows the conspiracies are going to catch up and get to him, and there wasn't much he could do about it. So now all he has to do is choose between the list of terrible futures or something like that. I thought it was super interesting in that aspect.
Yeah, for sure. But on the topic of the jihad, I mean, we were talking before the show, you know, if the Fremen of Dune are conducting this jihad across the universe, how many Fremen, like, are we reasonably looking at? Like, did they evacuate all of Dune, so they took all the Fremen and are, like, conquering the universe with them? Or, like, what's going on?
Well, I thought the premise of the first book is the Fremen, due to being, like, these super deprived people out in the desert, are just, like, that much better than everybody.
Yeah.
So when they decide, like, let's go conquer the universe, it doesn't matter how many of them they're just gonna do it.
They're just, like, unleashed because of, like, the power of the Kwitatararak.
Like, at least that's the, like, in-universe justification for this, you know, semi-nonsense.
There's disbelief that there's enough Fremen to do this? Is that sort of the premise?
Yeah, I guess the question is, like, even if you were to take, like, everyone on Earth and say, hey, let's go take over a bunch of planets, there are not enough people on Earth to take over multiple planets, much less, like, take over an entire empire. Even if all of us were fighting people, and we have a lot of kids and elderly, in fact, you know, the United States is mostly elderly people, so, like, unless, like, everyone's, like, a fucking, like, Arnold Schwarzenegger, you're not going to be doing, like, old Arnold Schwarzenegger, you're not going to be getting this level of conquest that I think you expect from a desert planet.
I'm imagining, like, Fremen in their 70s, like, with just, like, you know, belts of ammunition across their chest, being like, I grew up on desert planets, I am the best, and just, like, fighting, like, thousands of, you know, opposing soldiers and just wiping the floor with them.
But they can ride sandworms.
In planets without sand? Without worms?
Let's put something into context, all right? The book explains that Fremen, like, the Fremen could easily go, like, 1 on 20 versus the Sardaukar, and the Sardaukar could come on these, like,
1 on 20 from, like, everyone else.
These these, like, starship liners, where there'd be, what, like, 1,000 of them, could take over a planet. So we have to assume that planets are not that well inhabited, and that also, basically, the Fremen are, like, I don't know, what would be a comparison? Like, the most super of super commandos? They're, like, 1 to 1,000.
They're the Expendables.
They're each, like, Arnold.
An Expendables movie.
They're each Arnold Schwarzenegger commando.
Exactly. You put 100 people down, and they basically can come and kill whoever they want to, essentially.
So, isn't part of the theme of the book, like, now that they've taken over the universe and have, like, water and resources, like, now they may be becoming weak?
Yeah, there was that. There was actually, you know, they made one good point in the book, which was that even though they have a lot of fighters, they don't have very many administrators. So one of them were saying, like, oh, one of the keys to killing Paul is, like, getting rid of his very few number of administrators on every planet, and then, like, it would all descend to chaos. I was like, okay, at least there's some sense being, you know, said here that, you know, it's not like, oh, the Fremen are also extremely good bureaucrats, and we know all about democratic government or however type of government he chooses to run it in.
It's not democracy, for sure.
It's like a theocracy. Is it God? Is it like a theocracy at the point because he's like God Emperor?
Isn't it literally an empire, Imperium?
I may call it God Emperor.
I mean, he is Emperor. Yeah. That's one of the future books. I think that's his son Leto. That was born at the end of this book, right?
Yeah.
I have not read those other books.
Yeah, I don't think most of us have. Has anyone actually read the future ones?
I think I have.
No.
Oh,
I think I have, and I think I've also read the prequels written by his sons.
Oh, no spoilers.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no spoilers. Don't worry, except for the title, God Emperor of Dune. You know how that one's going to end.
Yeah,
I've just seen the pictures of the man sandworm thing, and I'm just like, what happens?
Maybe we'll find out in a future episode.
He's riding his dad into the future.
Floaty spice babies and tanks, and those are the steersmen.
The spice, Charlie. That's what happens.
Spice.
So the only question I have is, in my spice cabinet, which spice should I be taking? Is it the paprika or is it the
nutmeg? It's nutmeg. Nutmeg is from worms.
Nutmeg lets me see the future. Got it. I'll add more to the dishes.
Since we're on Dune, I have to say probably my favorite moments of Rise of Skywalker was when there was a sandworm, and when you found out half the characters were spice runners. I was like, "Is this Dune?"
Rise of Skywalker is Dune. That sounds exactly like what they meant.
Are all the Jedi just high on spice? Is that what medical are?
Yeah, that's the midi-chlorians are made from spice. Anyway,
it's paprika.
Yeah, paprika. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, well, as far as other things to talk about, one thing I definitely wanted to mention, and it's something that we talked about when we talked about Dune in our previous episode, is how kind of light these sci-fi elements are. And you can see it a lot in this novel too. There is not a lot of sci-fi elements, with the possible exceptions of the Duncan Idaho Gola. So I feel like that's, kind of like a techie sci-fi element. And then the stone burner machine that ends up blinding Paul and all those other people. But otherwise, yes.
There's a floating spice baby man in an anti-gravity tank.
Well, my mistake.
To be fair, that's not really sci-fi. That's more like, fantasy. Come on.
Yeah.
To be honest, yeah, even compared to the last book, there's a lot less like glow globes and fat people with suspensors or whatever.
Yeah.
Hold on, where are we drawing the line here? Where are we drawing the line on sci-fi? What is required in order for it to be more or less sci-fi here?
So let me put it this way: if you, I mean, we kind of came to we kind of described Dune, the first novel, as this kind of combination between kind of like a medieval, just like with the castles and palace intrigue type stuff, and then across kind of like a genre cross with sci-fi, where there's planetary travel and this futuristic drugs and all that kind of stuff, different planets and all that kind of things. So in this novel, by comparison, there's just not as much there. There's just a few elements and that's it.
I was gonna say, because this novel depends a lot more on like Mentats and Bene Gesserit training, even than the last book as plot elements, and that kind of replaces a lot of future technology due to the setting banning like computing machines and that sort of thing.
Right.
So it's still there, and I'd say it's like even arguably almost more sci-fi, and like people can now train themselves to computer-like intelligence and computation through quote methods or something like that.
The power of friendship?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, to some extent, it becomes like technology as anti-technology, right? You're shunning all the types of technology that we would find to be traditional, or many of them that we would find to be traditional in our society. But that's only because they transcended them with these powers of maybe natural tech, or a mastery of natural tech, which I think is really pretty strong in both of these books. The ability to control your body in order to achieve a form, the ability to master genetics in order to achieve a superhuman being of incredible intelligence and be able to see in the future. All these things are like basically a mastery of what we would consider natural elements, but through a sort of like, I don't know, it's a sort of technology in and of itself. I mean, they even talk about the Bene Tleilax being able to do what are considered monstrous things, but it's generally what they're describing in the book. It kind of sounds a lot like genetic engineering.
It sounds like they're the closest thing we have to sci-fi. Also, it's been a while since we've read the first book. Is the prescience and everything supposed to be like that, supposed to be mystical powers, or is the explanation supposed to be just like you are just that good at math and, well, I guess there's like looking at the light and all that stuff, but it's like, are you just that good at like math and putting everything together that you can predict the future or whatever?
I don't think it's like an Asimov kind of like foundation kind of predict the future with math. It definitely feels much more religious than
Okay.
Yeah, it felt like mysticism.
That's
like when you have to take drugs in order to do it, like, it's much more hand wavy.
Had to get high to see the future.
Steroids for the brain? It doesn't sound very mystical to me. I mean, I think that explanation seems plausible. That it is basically just like a mentat on steroids. They've been able, is the Kwisatz Haderach basically the perfection of the mentat?
Is he just a Grammaton cleric?
They're crossing up your universes.
It's a Scroad Rider.
Oh no. No, there's definitely like take drugs and get mystical powers versus, and that crossed with like just train yourself to be a computer mentat. And speaking of that, let's talk about Duncan Idaho for a second. I feel like Frank Herbert really freaking loved that character from the first one, so he just had to bring him back to the second one. And not only that, he's like an undead robot, and not only that, he overcomes his programming because of the power of friendship.
And not only that, he also gets hot with the ladies. And the moment they see him, they're like, "Oh, I'll marry that dude for sure." It's like he's a dead body, like that reanimated. It's like, no, I don't care if I'm like the sister of Paul Atreides. I got the hots for him. And everyone, it's funny because during the scheming time point, they're like, "Oh, when we bring him back, she's totally gonna fall for him." And like she sees him, she's like, "I totally fall for him." It's like, how did you predict that?
Because she has your mom's hots for memories. They explain it. So,
It's funny because I feel like the Duncan Idaho is like the James Bond in the sense that like all the women want him and all the guys want to be him just because he's awesome and has like random sex appeal for some reason. So I feel like the author's like, I need Duncan Idaho back in this, even if he's an undead robot.
So my copy of the book had a foreword, and one of the things they said is apparently like audiences were super sad that Duncan Idaho died, and Frank Herbert was totally aware of this. So whether it was just him or like him along with like, I know the audience wants him back, it seemed to imply that that was part of the reason is he was a cool character that he was like, I want him back, so he brought him back.
I'm not, and to be fair, I like the character a lot, and even especially from the first novel where he's, you know, I think he dies in the defense of Paul and things like that to cover his escape from the Harkonnens when they take over. So like, you know, likable character, and Frank Herbert's just like, I need him back.
So what you took it as he just like overcame the programming to kill just because the power of friendship, lols, right?
Yes, that was what I got out of that.
Yeah, so I interpreted it as because the face dancer came in so immediately and was like, hey, look, we can bring back a person as the original person, that was actually, what was the face dancer's name again? I've read like 2 books since I read this.
Scytale. Yeah.
That was actually Scytale's plan to program him so hardcore against his own natural self that his natural self would force itself back as the original personality. Yeah. And he knew that was going to happen, and he jumped in at the right moment when Chaney died to be like, look, I can bring people back, I can bring your wife back. Like, I thought that was all part of the plot, like his plot. Not just like Duncan Idaho is too awesome to be an assassin.
No, they explain that. They explain it that like Paul asks him, what if Scytale is asked by Paul, I thought in the last, one of the last scenes when they're with Chaney. He asks him whether or not if Duncan couldn't overcome. Let's say that the Blending Twi'leks people couldn't create the Gola that would be a direct representation, and hate remained. Well, then he would have stabbed Paul, right? So then what would have happened? What would have been the plan after that? And the plan would have been, he explains, the plan would have been, it would have been a lesser bargain, but we still would have bargained essentially for the brother. We would have bargained for Paul with Aaliyah to bring Paul back. So like they thought this through. The plan was always that either they succeed in creating a Gola that can come back and be the original person, in which case they have a good bargaining position, or they have a slightly less good bargaining position because they killed Paul by mistake. And they can't create perfect representation.
All I can say is that this was a very high-stakes gamble that they probably could have product tested back on their planet. Like, let's make someone great different from what they used to be with a small-time family. Oh, it works. Okay, let's do it with Paul Atreides. It's like, no, let's just gamble on the Emperor. Let's do it.
They preview it super far advanced in the book because they're talking about like, oh, someone won't. They'd rather die than do something that's against their nature, and you think they're talking about how they're going to kill Paul or something like that, but in fact they're talking about how they're going to recreate Duncan Idaho.
But they said that in reference to the Kwisatz Haderach. Are they implying that Duncan is a Kwisatz Haderach?
No, so I think it was the type of thing where everyone else was taking it as that's how they're going to kill the Kwisatz Haderach, whereas like he understood that they had thought this all, like he'd been playing like 17 moves ahead. And so when he's bringing out these lines, he already knows what he's actually talking about that's going to happen in the book. Because he's playing like 4 dimensions. Yes.
They directly said, we created a Kwisatz Haderach, and that Kwisatz Haderach was destroyed because once it had created a pattern of itself, it could not become the anti-pattern of itself.
Well, yeah, so he's using that as a reference for his logic, right?
I guess so. But
you know at the end of the book that he has that idea in mind in terms of hate. Not in terms of Paul necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Keep in mind, I don't think we introduced it, but hate is the same thing as Duncan Idaho. It's just the Gola version.
The Gola version.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when they say hate, it's not because they're very angry. It's because I got confused by that as well.
Yeah. Well, even Charlie, even if like that was part of their plan the whole time, they're still banking on the plan that Duncan Idaho will overcome his instructions by the power of friendship, even if it's according to their plan.
By the power of friendship. That's ridiculous.
Fine. Still, that's why like my mind exploded when you summed it up that way at the start. I was like, oh my god, this book is the power of friendship.
Well, speaking of, so let's actually move on and talk about a different character. In my view, probably the main character, Paul. Yes. So as the main character of this novel, the Kwisatz Haderach. Just comparing it to the last book, like thematically and emotionally, Paul has like a crazily different journey here. To sum up, he has this prescience, and it helped him get to where he is, but he feels like he's kind of in this like hellhole of like being able to predict the future, where like his life is boring, and he's just like in this mode where he's just like trying to minimize all the bad stuff instead of doing anything positive. And this actually affected how I enjoyed the book. Like in the last one, he's just kind of this hero, and goes through I feel like a more typical like heroic like defeat the bad guy experience. Whereas here, it's like Paul gets torn down essentially by the end of the book, and thematically this could be like and I've seen kind of interpretations of this online where Frank Herbert doesn't he's kind of talking about like how these high charisma leaders are just not really a great thing in these kinds of societies, and I can totally see that as a valid point. Like in my brain I think about it, I'm like, okay, yes, that is actually a very valid thematic element, but then I think about what Paul goes through in this novel, and it just makes me really sad, and I probably don't want to read this anymore. What do you guys think about that?
You're in love with Paul and you don't like seeing him suffer?
I want to see him have a good time, He's a emperor, I want to see him...
You don't want to watch his eyes melted out of his head as his wife dies in childbirth, and then he has to walk out into the desert and be swallowed by sandworms or whatever?
Yeah.
Not what you were hoping for?
No, that's not a good time.
He's literally the defeated leader through basically the entire book. And his enemy isn't even any of the people who are part of the conspiracy. His enemy is fate, or right. As he describes it, fate. It's basically a future that he doesn't see any way from escaping, and he knows that he has to follow that same fate because he perceives it to be the best one, but he loses, and he knows he loses essentially throughout the entire book.
Yeah.
Right.
I thought the first book had enough implications that this was essentially what he was going, like he knew this is where it was all going. Like rear at the book, basically he was trying to avoid this the whole time until they kill his son, and he's just like, screw it, and I'm just going to do it anyway because I hate everybody, and the Emperor and the Sardaukar and the Harkonnens are jerks. Like, and I felt like this was a very logical place for him to end up. Like, I understand getting caught up in just the excitement of the first book, because the first was awesome, but I felt that this was like a really appropriate, believable, sobering follow-up to the first book.
Yeah, for sure. And that's kind of what I got out of it too. You get that, like you said, there's this little glimpse of like things going to hell at the end of Dune, and kind of like when you're reading Dune, you're kind of like, yeah, he won, and then he's just like, and I see myself just like murdering everyone in the universe and becoming the boss, and you're just kind of like, oh. And then in this book, sure enough, he murders everyone and becomes the boss, and then doesn't even have a good time doing it,
And he has weird extra prescient children that he can't even know. Like, he doesn't even bother asking his wife. He's just like, oh, there was another one. Like, yes, because he can see the future, and I can't tell people who can see the future.
His future is so imperfect. I don't think so. They talk about the prescience and how many people have it. The Guildsmen have it, Bene Gesserit have it, Aaliyah has it. There's prescience to some extent in all of them. He has extra powerful prescience, maybe even, but not perfect prescience. Even he does not have perfect prescience because he's not able to predict that he has two children. He's not able to see what happens when he goes and visits the old Fedaykin commander before the Stoneberg goes off. He's not able to see a lot of information beforehand, and I don't feel like I think even he believed in fate, the fate that he predicted or that he saw way too much.
I thought
I'm
he
not
pretty
sure.
clearly knew he was going to have his eyes melted out. I thought that was like one of the things that like when it happened, he's already done this a million times in his prescience.
Yeah, but okay. Well, what about the ability that people who have prescience
Yeah,
are
so that's the one
obscured?
thing. Mhm.
They're obscured from his ability to see them and see their fate and see. I want to say it's not really fate, but he's able to be everywhere and see everything at all time, all places. But he can't see those people. So that means if he can't see those people at any given time or any given part of space, then he can't predict their future either. They're sort of like if you don't know those agents, then how can you predict the future entirely? I just feel like his fate, this idea of fate was way too believable. I
This
don't
is a
think
data
so.
science problem. You have huge amounts of data, you have some missing data, and then you got standard error around your prediction. But you're like, oh, in the end, I will win, or my children will win. I don't know all the details of how my child is going to win. Oops, one child, two children, standard deviation, plus or minus one. Close enough, right? And then he's like, but he did end up getting what he wanted in the end. He's like, okay, I know I'm going to lose my wife because I got this prediction. This moon's going to fall, my wife's going to die. But I got to keep my kids alive, right? So I got to make sure the kid stays alive. Oh, I got two kids. They both stayed alive. And I got to die on my own terms. It wasn't like he got assassinated before his kids made it up. It's like his kids become the god emperors of Dune or whatever. So I almost feel like in terms of this book, he's not thinking as much for himself in terms of victory. He's like, I don't want to win for myself. He wants to win for his family. He's thinking much more as a father kind of figure. And now that I'm a father, like I kind of see where he's coming from. Whereas like, before I had kids, it'd be like, oh, I want to take on the world. I want to make a lot of money. I want to get a nice house. I want marry a beautiful wife. And then I got kids. It's like, well, if I had to choose between me having a great life and my kids having a great life, I would almost lean towards giving my kids a great life. I wake up at all times of night. I don't get very much sleep. Take care of my kids. My kids have a great life. I don't sleep very much, which I'm sure you're experiencing, John.
I was saying you're going to give John PTSD right now.
But that's the sacrifice you make to make your kid the god emperor of Dune, as opposed to you being the god emperor of Dune and your kids all being dead. And you just live on your own without a wife and no kids, right? I feel like he chose that future. I think he won. Like as a father, I agree with this. His decision in the end.
I mean so all of these things happen in the novel, but like by and large, like Paul is still in this hellhole of a existence. Like I feel like that doesn't really that's a relatively minor part of the novel. I mean, yes, he of course does what he does for his family, but like ultimately he's in this torturous state like most of the book. Like did that affect the how much you guys enjoyed the book, or were you just like that? I mean, that's just where he's at.
I mean, it's sad when they even straight up say there's parts where he's been prescient for so long that even going through the motions of going through the present is kind of meaningless because he already knows exactly what's happening and going on for a lot of it. That's a part, an actual part where he's with Cheney. He's just it's just kind of doing it, but then he gets kind of brought back to the present. So I think one of my favorite parts in the book is when they're talking about but you knew that was going to happen, or Erewhon's but you know that's going to happen anyway, and he's just like, the Force doesn't work that way.
Again with the Star Wars, it's literally the same IP at this point, right?
Did anybody else get the impression that essentially the plot is fatally flawed? There's a critical element that Paul should have been able to achieve, which would have undone everything that forces his hand and causes him to fail in the way that he does.
You mean there should have been Deus Ex Machina, like some sort of magical angel that can save him, and then he becomes super god emperor and his kids too?
No, the whole thing is precipitated by you guys all say Cheney. Is that from the audiobook or something?
Cheney, yeah.
Okay, because I always say Chani.
Because I always read it as Chani, but I've had, I think in our last podcast and a couple times I've seen it spelled out phonetically, it's Cheney.
Okay, well,
I like Chani better for the whatever.
There's a lot of Arabic references in this book, and Cheney makes no sense to me. But anyway,
Cheney's a good-looking guy.
Okay, so Cheney, the whole leverage point of the entire book, the plot, is leveraged on Cheney dying and him not being able to prevent that, trying to find a solution where she doesn't die, and I feel like that is completely reversible or completely avoidable, because why does she die? They explain in the book that she dies because she has two children in childbirth, and the fact that she was given a contraceptive for so long before she got pregnant meant that the entire labor was sped up and it expended her life. So, if she didn't get the contraceptive, by Irulan for so long, then she wouldn't have died. So why wasn't Paul able, with all of his prescience and so forth and so on, able not to see that the person in his own household was giving a contraceptive to his wife?
So
What's that all about?
There's a counter argument behind that. So one was that apparently, I think it was alluded to that Paul knew that she was getting contraceptives, but what Paul was struggling with was his prediction of the moon falling, which he knew was associated with Channing dying. So in his mind, the moment Channing started going into childbirth, that was the moment that she would die, because he knew that she would die because of the childbirth. So he actually was okay with her taking contraceptives for a while, because he said, I'm not ready. I can't come up with a future where she survives this childbirth thing. So I don't want to have kids yet because I don't have a solution yet. So her taking contraceptives kept her alive longer, and he was just like kept looking to the future. He's like, there's got to be some other way. There's got to be some other way. And he was like, and then he's like, fuck, there's no other way. Like, she has to die. And then she took it upon herself to avoid the contraceptives and got pregnant. He was like, okay, we're in the end game now. We got to just ride this through. I just got to do what's best out of, she has to die. My kids have to live somehow, or my kid has to live.
How could he not have seen this if he can see all the other fates and all the other steps along the way? Plus, there's a problem with that, which assumes that he has agency. And throughout the book, he talks about how he doesn't have agency.
John,
how he's just walking along the path.
His kid is a Kwisatz Haderach, so he's a prophet. So he can't see what's going on in the womb. Kid has created a future ball inside the womb, so he's like, he can't see it there, so he doesn't know what's going on.
Any of this time where there's time travel or future vision, like there's always this chance of like just crazy plot holes like this.
This is kind of the in-universe justification again, is I think they keep saying like, I would like to save my wife, but when I look at the other futures, all of them are worse, like them getting kidnapped and paraded around as slaves or something like that, like I think is one of the specific ones they mentioned. So I think the indication isn't so much that he couldn't stop it as any attempt to stop it would result in twists that would just make everything worse in the end.
Yeah, I think
so, like,
I got that
he
as well.
could, yeah, he could see his options. Like, there's actually, I was joking with my brother-in-law that there's a Rick and Morty episode where he finds a crystal that lets him see the future, and it's all these different options, so he just starts doing really stupid things to get to the future he wants. And I was like, that's just this book. That's just Paul being like, oh, I gotta do this because it's gonna result in the least terrible future, as he just stupidly does things that are, like, against his own interests.
Yeah. Yep. It's definitely a crazy Kwisatz Haderach problem, right, Charlie? Yeah, there you go. All right. Actually, and you know, speaking of all of this, Paul, you know, and his baby shenanigans, you know, we're talking a little bit before the show, and somebody had asked, like, why are all the babies in the Atreides line all pre-prescient at this point? And I think it's basically explained as because, you know, Paul and his sister got the spice OD in the last novel, then it's just kind of become this hereditary thing. But did you guys have a different explanation for that?
It doesn't make any sense. They're not only are they pre-prescient, but they're also Aaliyah is not the same as Paul. Aaliyah has all of the lives and memories of every single person before her in the womb from conception.
Yeah, this was the Bene Gesserit shenanigans.
Like ritual thing.
That's right. So it doesn't make sense to me that all of that would be passed to all of them, which I think is what they allude to. Is that, did you guys read into it the same way?
I think so. It's just become this hereditary thing, right?
But how would that be passed on? Because it's not even the same mother. Aaliyah is the one who has all those lives. So how would they get all those lives?
The power of friend or spice. One of those.
I didn't read it like that.
Power of friendly spice.
I thought it had something to do with, like, I don't know. It's like, you know, part of the reason Chanu died is because the children developed so fast, but I heard part of the reason they developed so fast was because of the spice or something like that. And, like, you know, it felt very hand-wavy in terms of, like, everything's connected, it works, don't think about it.
Yeah, I got a little hand-waviness as well, but I feel like, you know, maybe if there's a listener that knows better than us, you can leave a comment and tell us how dumb we actually are, and what one line we missed in the book that explains all this stuff.
Ooh, people leave comments?
I mean, it could happen at any time.
Stavros, you've been eating a little too much paprika.
I know.
You're seeing in the future now. Huh?
Somebody's feeding me the paprika on the side or something. Anyway, so let's get into
your eyes are looking a little blue, Stavros.
I know. Wow, it's like a new fashion thing or something. Anyway, so let's go into our discussion topic here. So we kind of just talking a little bit before the show. We were trying to come up with what experience, real life experience, is present in the real world that is most similar to Paul's prescience as depicted in the novel. So I hope all you guys have all your answers ready. I'll go first. You guys are gonna have to bear with me a little bit here, but I feel like when Charlie plays video games, he's very much like Paul here. And just hear me out. Paul, he's got his eye on the future. He can't see everything. There are some holes here. And Charlie, I feel like you have, with enough experience playing retro games, let's face it, all retro games are basically really similar. You eventually be able to see the future. It's kind of like you're predicting the future there. But ultimately, just like Paul is in the book, you're just not happy with that. Something about being able to see the future, playing all the games the best possible way, is just not really, it doesn't really make you happy. Do you want something more? And that's just, and that's just what makes it so similar. So that's what I'm going with. I'm going when Charlie plays retro video games.
Just that I find the future unsatisfying.
Sure, if that's what you're getting at.
I've already predicted that all futures are unsatisfying given the past I've already experienced.
Exactly, something like that.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go to Vincent. Vincent, what is your argument? Your suggestion?
So if the question is, what experience in life is most like knowing what the future is going to be? I would say that actually parenting a small child is, you can get to it.
So hold on. So let me stop you right there, because Paul does not have a good time with his prescience in this novel. So are you really making this? Are you really making this distinction?
Well, I mean, child raising is not all like sunshine and daisies all the time. I mean, parenting is hard. I mean, there's always ups and downs. Like, being the emperor is pretty awesome, but like at the same time, sometimes you got to do bureaucracy. Sometimes your family gets killed. Like bad things happen to emperors too, right?
Yes.
Your allegiance gets destroyed. I mean, I wouldn't say that like, well, I mean, people do get older and people do pass, hopefully not in any of our families anytime soon. But I would say that, like, getting back to my point is that raising a child is a little bit like future vision, because they always say, like, don't make the mistakes my parents made. Like, you can see kids, like, as they walk through life, they're walking around, you see them walking towards the step, and they don't see the step, and that if they take that step, they're going to fall down the stairs. Like, there's a little bit of future vision there. It's like, if I sit back on this couch and keep drinking my beer and do nothing, my kid's going to fall down the stairs. Or I can get up and I can save that kid before they get on the stairs, and they will never know that I changed their future from one with brain damage to one that was a happy childhood. Or you see, like, the hot stove, your kid's going to touch that hot stove. Or you have like a can of beer sitting out on the table, and your kids love doing what you do. They're going to take a sip if you let them. Like, there's a lot of future vision around little kids, because they're very simple kind of equations, almost like they're solvable. Like, you see what they look at and what's on their mind. Like, that kid is totally going to throw that thing on the ground. Like, oh, that kid is totally going to try and shove that cookie in his mouth. When you're not looking, she's going to eat that entire cookie when you're not paying attention, right? Like, it's very interesting, and I love it, because in some ways you do feel like the God Emperor, because you're like, oh, I know what the future is coming. I know I can stop it or I can change it. And it's those moments where you actually inspire kids. Like, I know if I do something, if I say, there's no way you can open that, you can pee in that toilet, it's way too hard. You're like, oh, I see the future. I know what's going to happen. She's like, oh, I can pee in the toilet. I'm going to the toilet right now. You're like, oh, I'm such a god. Like, those are the moments you're like, yes, you use your power for good. And like, you take a little more paprika and you're like, I might be able to raise this kid into a functioning adult. That's what I love.
Okay. All right. Good.
Oh my God, Vincent. As an uncle with two sisters who both have children, I am in the position of Paul, where I see the cookie on the table and I'm like, why doesn't someone move the goddamn cookie? And then the child gets the cookie and then they get yelled at and everyone's unhappy. Or I say, move the cookie, and they tell me I'm a jerk and everyone's unhappy. So I just sit there knowing the future is terrible and there's nothing I can do.
So you're full on Paul Atreides.
You're full on Paul Atreides.
I was going to go to you next, Charlie. Are you saying that your life is similar to Paul Atreides?
No, I was just following up on Vincent's, because my answer is hopefully predictably. Literally, the point of math and science is to calculate the future. That's what you do when you go and waste your time learning how to do arithmetic and stuff.
Okay.
And just like Paul, I remember when I took linear algebra, and it's like, oh, here's like how you find the set of calculations that cannot be performed for desired solutions. I was like, oh, this is probably like many things in life where you're like, I want this to work out this way. And then you figure out that it is literally mathematically impossible, and you give up on it and move on to something else instead of wasting everyone's time trying to decide whatever stupid thing that can't happen.
How much higher can Charlie's voice go?
I don't know. Let's find out.
Also, my favorite example for my students was, you know how they built cathedrals back in the day? They just built them, and if they fell down, they tried again. Like, math and science are great. We don't do that anymore. Now we design it, and then we decide to underpay someone to build it so it falls down anyway.
Charlie, okay?
Very critical of, I guess, our entire market economy. Is that what we're
It's probably okay.
So what is your pitch then, Charlie? I kind of lost it there. Math. Is it math?
Math is prescience.
Okay, got it. All right, I'm glad we cleared that up, I guess. Go ahead, John. What's your pitch?
2 words to just totally slam Charlie's answer. Quantum mechanics.
Okay. Wow.
No, there is no such thing as objective reality. Particles can just show up and leave whenever they want. Basically, there's no such thing as objective reality. So you can't, therefore, mathematically decide the future or calculate the future.
Quantum mechanics reality exists. It's just reality. Reality is not real, and it's just a projection of some nonsense math that we don't understand what actual reality is because everyone just comes up with BS philosophy about it.
Charlie, you're a hologram and you're not in my universe. That's all I'm saying.
I think that's actually a theory by physicists nowadays. I think we may be a projection on the surface of some 4-dimensional black hole or something is legitimately science now.
Oh, God. Okay, so you're going with quantum mechanics then, John.
No, that was just my retort to Charlie.
I see, okay.
He got a retort.
All right.
Before I get a retort.
Okay.
Is this the policy debate thing again?
I know.
Were you visiting that segment?
He got a retort to you, Vince. I get a retort to him.
Who did I retort?
Stavros gets no retort, apparently,
No,
because he
definitely
started.
not. All right, so what is yours
my
then?
answer is it's exceedingly boring, which is that, basically, human beings are by that standard, human beings are just really bad mentats, essentially. Human beings use the power of our own mental capabilities to guess what's going to happen. I have a ball in my hand. If I open my hand up and let the ball go, it's probably going to fall towards the ground. That's a prediction. So what would be similar to this prescience in the novel, because obviously their ability to have prescience is enhanced by the spice, then I'm guessing that would be like you having coffee or speed or whatever, some type of a brain enhancing drug.
Is the spice just caffeine?
It's caffeine. Yeah.
If you take enough of it, do you turn into a weird space baby?
The Fremen invented Surge Cola. That's what we're saying.
That makes sense to me. It's pooped out by the sandworms, and then the Fremen bottle it and send it to vending machines.
Wait, is that where they get coffee?
Isn't that a Futurama episode?
Yes, you're totally right. Yes, the slurm is the spice. Slurm from Futurama is the spice.
Am I missing something? It is. It's from a worm too, right?
Yes, it definitely is. Yeah. Okay, so you're going with drugs, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, basically drugs. Okay. Yeah,
all right.
Drugs.
So let's vote on this, and keep in mind you cannot vote for your own answer. So to refresh. So the question is, what experience is most similar to Paul's prescience as depicted in this novel? My answer is Charlie when he plays retro video games. Vincent's answer is child raising. Charlie is math, and John is drugs. not even. You mentioned like 4 or 5 drugs of like varying calibers, so I just have to go with just straight up drugs.
Drugs.
So my vote, I'm gonna have to go with math, but not for the reason Charlie mentioned. Basically, when I think of math, I'm like, math is required. People should do it. Like you said, Charlie, you kind of predict the future. But when I do math, I get really sad, and I just don't like it. I just kind of want to die when I'm doing it. I didn't pick a career that involves it. So yeah, I feel like doing math, that would be the best answer for me. So 1 point for Charlie. How about you, Vincent? You cannot vote for your own.
I have to say that if you're trying to be the most like Paul possible, I would say you take drugs, even though I don't think it's related to the future prescience at all, but you would probably convince yourself that you're reading the future. And if your future involves selling your body for more drugs or going to prison, I'm pretty sure you're probably looking at a pretty accurate prediction.
You heard it here, folks. An epidemiologist is suggesting drugs.
All right, so we got 1 vote for drugs, 1 vote for math. How about you, Charlie?
Considering John just said drugs to do better prediction, aka math, like, I'm just going with John's answer because it is my answer. And in fact, sometimes I joke the reason I never did my master's and PhD is I never learned how to drink coffee. It makes me sick. So that just makes me feel better about everything, I guess.
Oh,
that's so Zensuni of you.
I like the reference. Okay, so now we've got 2 votes for drugs and 1 vote for math. How about you, John?
Well, I'm gonna have to throw away my vote. I think I'm gonna. Well, I mean, it's the answer that I like the best was Vincent's. It's poetic and beautiful, so
wow.
I'll go with
and
that.
That's a throwaway vote. Come on.
I mean, I feel like Vincent's answer is the answer when I most feel like Paul. When it's like I know what people are gonna do, and there's nothing I can do to stop it, and I hate it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Okay, well, congratulations, John. Apparently, drugs is the best, the best future seeing, self-hating. Yeah.
You're welcome.
All right, so let's jump into our final segment, our best thing, worst thing. The best thing you liked about the novel and the thing you disliked the most. I'll go first. Best thing I liked. So there's a lot of universe building in this book, which I thought was pretty cool. There's some new elements. I thought everything with the Gola was pretty cool. I actually like Duncan Idaho, despite the fact that he's just, the power of friendship personified. But I liked him, and like the climactic confrontation at the back of the book with the 2 babies in the room. I thought that was really cool. The worst things, it was just very, like, especially compared to the first one, just kind of slow. I didn't glomp onto the palace intrigue components quite as much, and like, having Paul just in this, hell of prescience, and just have him deconstructed the whole book, like, and he can even see his end coming, and he can't do anything about it. I didn't really like that much. Not really what I'm going for when I read books. Just whatever about the style just didn't pull that quite off for me. So that's my best thing and worst thing. Let's go to John first. John, what do you think? Best thing. You almost
never go to me first.
I know.
It only took how many seasons? No, I'm going to say that I really liked. I didn't actually like this book the first couple times I've read it, but it's grown on me, and I think that's mostly because I just like the Dune series. I like the characters. If you're the kind of person who enjoys this universe and you want to see what happens, I think that this book is kind of fun. And it's a book about politics. It's about bureaucracy. It's about spies. I think it's a pretty interesting sci-fi spy book, maybe even a mystery. But the other part of me, really dislikes things like the Duncan Idaho character. For the reasons that was mentioned previously in this episode, I agree. It's really annoying. Also, that I really disagreed with the way that prescience was handled almost in a completely religious fashion, because I really feel like Paul saw above religion as being sort of a construct, and so the fact that he referred to prescience as, in almost all religious terms, made me feel really... It made me feel unsatisfied. I really wanted there to be a sci-fi answer, an explanation. Even a hand-wavy explanation would have been better than what was provided in the novel. So
yeah, I think that's arguably one of the themes of the book too. Is that he's not big on this religious zealotry angle. So I can definitely see that. Okay, let's go to Charlie. What do you think, Charlie? Best and worst.
I mean, I think one of the coolest things about the book is it really is kind of the promise of the end of Dune, of being this awesome leader, becoming emperor, having prescience is almost like an unthinkable burden that's going to ruin his life. And like, you get to see how he's ended up here, how it all ends up, how it all ends. And I thought that was just super interesting that the author paid all that off in a book, kind of almost dedicated to that downer. But on the other hand, the worst thing is the book is just kind of paying off everything being a downer, which knows the same point. It makes me want to read the future books, but on the other hand, I've kind of heard the future books are also kind of a downer in terms of how they play out in terms of leadership and that sort of stuff. I find it super interesting, but on the other hand, besides the first book, I'd find it hard to recommend as like reading for entertainment. It's more just like interesting and thought-provoking, which I really like. So it's kind of like the same point for both best and worst thing.
Okay, interesting. All right, how about you, Vincent?
For me, I think that the best part of the book is the kind of, not necessarily perfect reality, but the much more realistic approach to what happens when you actually win as a protagonist. I think that there are too many books like, John Carter and like a bunch of other sci-fi books where it's like the main character wins and they go home with the girls and the money and they rule the galaxy happily ever after. Kind of a Star Wars kind of feeling. Like, oh yeah, we defeated the Emperor. Now everything's going to be groovy, right? But it's like, well, what happens after you knock down the Emperor? It's like, now you're the Emperor, and how do you take over all these, these countries and worlds that actually like the Emperor and don't like you? Like, are you now the new dictator? And I feel like Paul gets that treatment where he's like, well, yeah, in order to like take over all those continents and those countries, like, essentially we had to kill billions of people, like literally kill billions of people in order to like consolidate my rule. And they didn't shy away from that. There was like, oh, there's no hunky-dory situation where it's like, oh, you killed an obviously evil Palpatine and now you're the ruler of the galaxy because everyone loves you. It's like, no, people still hate you. You got to kill a bunch of them. And as a leader of like a huge government, he was also like, it was a huge theocracy, like he's a god, and they're literally creating like a jihad across all these other countries and continents and worlds. And he's like, oh, I can't control any of it, and I'm kind of uncomfortable with the fact that a lot of people are killing in my name. Like it wasn't a perfect world, so you kind of get this feeling that like, oh, this is actually what happens when you win. Like you don't always win, you kind of lose a little bit. So I like that approach. The other thing that was also really kind of twisted was not twisted, but it was kind of like the idea that, the Fremen were always kind of construed to be kind of like these kind of Middle Eastern kind of people, and them taking over essentially the Western world with like the genetic engineers and like the Bene Gesserit who are like predicting and plotting and like kind of Western feeling people. It's kind of like a very weird way to kind of twist like the current social reality of the world that we live in. So I thought that was actually quite interesting as well. I guess the one thing I disliked about the book was that the first book had so much more like overt references to science fiction, like descriptions about personal shields and like still suits and like flying copters and lasers and things like that, and like weapons of mass destruction. Like it felt more well described, and a lot of those elements were completely discarded in this book. Like personal shields were not completely left out. There's almost little to no personal combat. There was of course like a nuke that was, or the stone burn which was dropped, but that was like besides that and the final fight where they saved the children, there was little to no combat and little to no use of like a systematic like sci-fi kind of thing. So there are no new sci-fi ideas like came up that really struck me in this book. So that was kind of a detractor. I was kind of looking forward to something new. But all in all, it's a very interesting book, and I would say that most people do really like the first Dune, like hands down. And then the future books kind of go towards like the Ender's Game kind of series. Like the first book is awesome, and the rest of them is like, if you really like the universe, you'll like the rest of the books. But if you're not a huge fan of the universe, you probably will fall off the bandwagon eventually.
Yeah, good
overall,
point.
I would recommend the book, but it's more like a B compared to the initial A of the first Dune.
Yeah, great point. I had an agreement with a lot of those points for sure. Okay, well, that wraps up our first episode of season 3, episode 30. And of course, if anyone has any feedback or suggestions on books we should read and discuss, you can reach us at subplotofcoursepodcast@gmail.com or on Twitter at @subplotpodcast. And for next month, February, we're going to be reading a lesser-known author. The book is called Entromancy, a cyberpunk novel by M.S. Farzan. Say goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Is Farzan going to come on? I would love to hear him.
Yeah, we'll have to look into that for sure.
If he's listening, please contact us.
We have the power of friendship. Join us.
At subplotofcourse@tumblr/chatroulette.com.
We have lots
Bye,
of
everybody.
Paprika.